Rome conquered the Mediterranean. It crushed kingdoms. It erased empires. Then Rome crossed into Africa, and a one-eyed African queen broke its army. She destroyed Roman forts, forced the empire to retreat, and buried the head of their emperor under her temple so her people would walk on him every day. Her name was Amanirenas, and history tried to erase her. Long before Europe called Africa weak, there stood the kingdom of Kush. Not a tribe, a kingdom. South of Egypt in Nubia, modern Sudan, Kush controlled gold, trade routes, and the southern gateways of the Nile. It survived Egypt, it survived Assyria, it survived time itself. And now, it stood in the path of the most violent empire the world had ever known. Amanirenas was not a symbolic queen. She was a war ruler. She fought on the battlefield, and in one of those battles, she lost her eye. Rome thought that meant weakness. They were wrong. By 24 BCE, Augustus Caesar ruled the Mediterranean world. Egypt had already fallen. The grain of Africa now fed Roman soldiers. From Egypt, Rome looked south and saw Kush. And like every empire before it, Rome wanted more. The Roman governor Petronius marched with his legions into Nubia. To Rome, this was supposed to be easy. Another expansion, another name added to a growing list of conquered lands. Roman soldiers burned cities, seized temples, desecrated sacred ground. They expected surrender. What they got was war. Rome never conquered quietly. Where its legions marched, cities turned into warnings. Villages were burned, civilians were dragged into chains. Sacred shrines were stripped, not for strategy, but for humiliation. Roman soldiers did not just take land, they took dignity. They took captives. They took gods from temples and melted them into trophies for the empire. In Kush, the invasion was not only military, it was psychological. A message sent in blood: submit or be erased. And across Nubia, that message reached one woman with one eye and an army that refused to disappear. Rome expected silence. Amanirenas prepared fire. Amanirenas did not kneel. She counterattacked. Kushite forces struck Roman forts along the Nile. Supply posts vanished overnight. Roman statues were torn down in the streets of occupied cities. And then something unimaginable happened. The bronze head of Emperor Augustus himself was captured. The symbol of Roman world power, taken as African war loot. From that moment on, Rome was no longer hunting. Rome was being hunted. Amanirenas never fought Rome the way Rome wanted to fight. She avoided open battlefield clashes. She attacked where Rome was weakest. Supply lines, water routes, food stores. In the desert, Roman armor became a death sentence. Legionnaires collapsed from heat and thirst, trapped under metal in the African sun. Kushite forces struck forts at night, vanished into the land by morning, returned days later somewhere else entirely. The desert became her weapon. Time became her ally. Rome's war machine, the most feared on earth, began to choke. Amanirenas did not fight like Rome. She did not line her soldiers up to die under shields and steel. She turned the land itself into a battlefield. Kushite scouts moved ahead of Roman columns, watching, counting, waiting. When Roman supply carts rolled in, heavy and slow, they were attacked at night. When Roman soldiers drank from wells, those wells vanished by morning. When fort messengers rode for reinforcements, they never arrived. The Romans began to fear the dark. They began to fear the silence. They began to fear the land. Legions trained for open combat now fought an enemy they could not see. An enemy that struck in sandstorms, from hills, from riverbanks, from villages that looked empty until arrows fell from nowhere. This was no wild resistance. This was strategy. Amanirenas was not improvising. She was dismantling Rome, piece by piece. Governor Petronius did something Roman governors almost never did. He ordered a retreat. Roman garrisons were abandoned, forts were evacuated, occupation zones were pulled back. Rome, retreating in Africa. Augustus had expected conquest. Instead, he received humiliation. An empire that ruled from Britain to Syria could not break one African kingdom led by a one-eyed queen. Rome returned, not with legions, but with negotiators. Not as a master, as an equal. Kush paid no tribute, no Roman governor was installed, no surrender was signed. Amanirenas kept her independence, and then she delivered Rome's final humiliation. She placed the captured bronze head of Augustus beneath the entrance of a temple, so every worshipper walked on Rome's emperor, every day. Africa walked on the empire. Rome never forgave this defeat. But instead of answering it with another war, it answered with silence. Roman historians wrote volumes about their victories. They celebrated generals who failed upward. They carved disasters into triumphs. But Amanirenas did not fit their story. So they shrank her, dismissed her, and eventually erased her. When European scholars rediscovered African history centuries later, they followed Roman records. They taught the world that Africa was defeated, that Africa was passive, that Africa waited for conquest. They did not teach that Africa broke Rome. And that lie hardened into textbooks, into documentaries, into global belief. Not because it was true, but because the truth was too humiliating for an empire to admit. Today, Africa is still portrayed as conquered, weak, dependent. But 2,000 years ago, Africa broke Rome. With strategy, with patience, with intelligence. Led by a one-eyed queen, they tried to delete from history. They built their world on the idea that Africa was conquered. But they forgot to mention the queen who stopped their greatest army. Amanirenas did not lose to Rome. Rome survived her. If that truth was hidden from you, it's because someone needed you to believe Africa had no victories. If you were never taught this, it wasn't an accident. These stories were buried on purpose. And this channel exists to dig them back up. Subscribe if you want the history they never wanted you to know.